Today on Husky Talk, we're honored to have your true, Iditarod, legend join us. He is one of the co-founders of Iditarod, and has been involved in the race for over 50 years. He has been in the musher, teacher, and band director. Originally from South Dakota, he played a key role in helping us, Joe Redington, bring the Iditarod to life. We're excited to hear his stories about the early days of the race. Please welcome to the show, Gleo Huyck. Hello, Gleo. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Alaska?
Sure. My family and I moved to Alaska in 1970. I'm hearing a feedback right now. Okay. Anyway, we moved here in 1970. I came up here as a teacher for the Matanuska-Susitna Borough School District, and I taught music for many years, and then I became part of the administration of the school district and became director of community schools. And I did that until my retirement several years ago. I have two daughters, Heather and Marzia. Heather is a teacher and lives close to me here and has two children, and Marzia lives in Anchorage and has two children in there. And so that is my family. And well, as soon as I got to Alaska, I became interested in mush. And I'm a friend of Joe Redington and Tom Johnson, and the founders of the face. Here's a picture of the three of us. That's on the left there with Tom Johnson. I'm in the middle, and Joe Redington is on the right. And this picture was taken, I believe, in 1974, 75. It was taken in Huyck, Alaska, which was one of the checkpoints in the original Iditarod race. Anyway, Joe, Tom, and I many times mushed together. We all had dogs, and of course, and I had 45 dogs at one time. And in the summer of 1972, Joe asked me to join him in moving to Unalakleet for the summer, and we bought fish from the fishermen in Unalakleet, and we processed them and then flew them out to Seattle and Anchorage when needed. And so we did that all summer, and during that time, we talked a lot about dog mushing and about long-distance dog mushing. During the beginning of the 20th century, actually, there was a lot of long-distance dog mushing in Alaska of 200 to 300 miles. And Joe was really interested in getting a new race started, and we talked a lot about that. But we didn't make any plans to actually start it. When we got back to Anchorage at the end of that summer, I got together with Tom and Joe many times, and we started talking about long distance mushing. And in October, Tom and I went to Anchorage to buy a truckload of dog food, and because we bought it by the truckload at that time. And when talking to each other in Anchorage, we decided to call Joe and offer to help him start the race that year, which we did. So we called Joe, and Joe said, "Do you really think we can do it this year?" And we said, "Well, we can try." We had often started planning many short distance races since I was president of the Aurora Dog Mushers Club, and so we ran those successfully. Joe's original idea was to have a dog sled race from Huyck to Iditarod and back. And so we met with that idea in mind. We also included other mushers in the Anchorage and Matsu Valley area to get the race started. And in one of those races or one of those meetings, Bill Weimer, who became instrumental in helping us plan the race, suggested that because no one lived in Huyck and no one lived in Iditarod, it might be kind of hard to get interest in the race. So he suggested that we start in Anchorage and go to Nome because we had people who lived in both places. And so Joe was not that keen about the idea at first. And since a lot of our meetings with Joe occurred on our trips back and forth to Anchorage in a truck, usually Tom's truck or my truck, because Joe's truck often was broken down. But we talked a lot about the race and made a lot of plans in those truck drives. And we talked Joe into accepting the idea of going from Anchorage to Nome during that ride home that night. So we met with lots of different mushers and people involved, including lawyers and others who helped us get the race started, to get started as a nonprofit, etc. We decided on starting the race the first weekend in March because that did not interfere with any other March races at the time. The Iditarod race name was one that we came up with because we were to go through the Iditarod. Oh, also because most of the trails along the Iditarod Trail. The name Iditarod means distant place. Started the race weekend. We didn't have the money to pay off mushers. Got to Nome, and we didn't know how it would even take them to get to Nome because this race had never been done before. So we asked Joe not to go on the, and he reluctantly agreed not to go. Three of us, Studio was on giving money off the musher. When they can learn, I'm keeping a lot of whatever we don't have all day. Basically, got to the dinner that we were going to have the race. And I think fourth time space. I could be off in that number. Uh, so why don't I get some years after what you'd like to know about the race? Great.
Some people have a misconception of why the race started. It does not start as a way to honor the Surum Run. Tell us the main reasons Joe and you started this race.
Why did we start the race? What reasons?
Yes.
You mentioned something about the Surum Run in 1925. That never came up in our discussion of this race, even though several authors have quoted that as a reason for the race. It never was. So hopefully someday in the future that myth can be canceled out. We started the race because we were very concerned, especially Joe, about snow machines taking over travel in the villages and the lack of dog teams now. And so we thought that if we had a really nice long distance race that went through several of the villages, that it would encourage mushers to get dogs again or to have new mushers get into the sport of dog mushing. And so that's the reason we started the race.
Does it bother you that sometimes incorrect information is floating around about the real reason the race started?
Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. There are a lot of myths out there about why and how the race started, and there's no way to actually talk about all of them. But the diphtheria run in 1925, the Surum run, is one of the big ones that seems to hang on, and so we need to bring that one to a halt. Um, The other one that is a big one for me anyway is that Dorothy Page is the mother of the Iditarod, and that just is not a true thing. She was called that by one of the newspaper editors when Joe and Tom and I went to see Dorothy about being part of the 1973 Iditarod race. She said, I want nothing to do with it. People are going to get hurt. I wash my hands of it. So she completely took herself out of that race. And the only reason we went to see her is that in 1967, they had a short race of 25 miles to commemorate the history of Alaska. And it was a very short race, and she was involved with that. And we thought maybe she would want to be involved in the first Iditarod race, but she took herself out of that, and she wasn't included as part of that race until a few years later when she saw that it was going to be successful, and she started to write an annual report on the race, which she wrote herself in as one of the founders. And it's completely false. So I just wanted to bring that out as another myth that is out there about the race. Next question.
If we go,
Go ahead, Anna.
you guys really felt strong about the importance of Alaskan Huskies. Do you feel the original Iditarod mushers felt the same?
Do I feel they what?
Felt the same?
I still didn't get the last three words.
The importance of Alaskan Huskies.
The importance of the Alaskan Huskies?
Oh, yes, yes. And the Alaskan Husky is not a purebred dog, by the way. The Alaskan Husky is a mix of several different breeds of dogs. It's a dog about 35 to 40 pounds. They're very well built for running. They love to run. And the mushers take very, very good care of their dogs because a dog that is not in top physical shape has trouble running for 1,000 miles. Actually, the race length is about 938 miles. So anyway, yes, we are very keen on taking care of the dogs. They're checked frequently by veterinarians before and at each checkpoint along the way of the race, and they're wonderful dogs.
Talk to us about how you planned such a huge event that traveled across the entire state of Alaska.
It's a tough trail, and you probably may have heard already this year that because of a lack of snow, the race is again being started in Fairbanks. I believe this is the fourth year that will happen. And I believe that your teacher was involved with one or two of the races when they went from Fairbanks to Nome. So she can probably tell you a lot about that.
Did you do your research?
Excuse me?
You did your research, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
2015, the Fairbanks was up. I was up there then. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. And so I don't know a lot about the first part of that race. I think it goes pretty much along the Yukon River until you get to Ruby, and then it joins the regular Iditarod Trail that we usually use in the northern route of that trail. Now, Aaron, when you were on that race as a teacher, did you travel the trail?
Yes, via bush plane, and that year we went up to Husky in 2015, which I know they're not doing this year.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm looking at the at the map right here. Yeah. Okay. So I really can't tell you a lot about that part of the trail. Like I said, your teacher can probably tell you more. Now this year there's some open water, and because of that, they're going to have to travel alongside the Yukon River on the land. And I don't know how much trouble they're going to have breaking trail there, but we'll find out, I guess.
Can you tell us some of the biggest challenges in getting the race off the ground were?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, money was the biggest challenge. We had promised a $50,000 purse, and we got some early money from one of our local sponsors. We got $10,000 to get the race started, and that money went pretty quickly. By the time the race started, we had no money for the mushers. We did not have the $50,000. We had been promised that money by a local realtor, and about a week before the race started, he backed out. And so that's one of the reasons that we asked Joe not to go on that first race, is that we needed him to help Tom and I raise the money. And we actually did raise all but $7,000 of it by the time the mushers got to Nome. And Dan Seavey, who was a good friend of ours and who we mushed with quite a bit, he lives in Seward. And Dan Seavey came in, I believe, third that year, and his prize money was $7,000. And so he gave that money to us to pay off the rest of the mushers, and then he was reimbursed for that money in later years. So that was our biggest hassle, was to raise enough money for the race after we announced it. The second hassle that we had was breaking trail, because a lot of that trail had not been used in many years, and so we needed to break trail so the dogs could get through. I don't have pictures of that right now, but I have a few pictures of where I was out with Tom and other helpers to break trail before the race started. And then we also got the Army to help break trail with snow machines, and they were a big help for that first race. Right now, it's easy because we have the Iron Dog race, which is snow machines from Anchorage to Nome, and they break trail every year now before the regular race. However, they found out that there's 120 miles of the trail that there is no snow. And so when they reported that back to headquarters, that's when they finally made the decision, about a week and a half ago or so, to move the beginning of the race to Fairbanks.
If we were at some of those first races, what would the atmosphere or the anticipation be like, especially compared to today?
Oh, the villagers really do like the race. For one thing, it does bring money into the villages. And secondly, it's a very exciting time to have the mushers come through and all of the news people there to take pictures and report on it. And so it's a nice time. A lot of them have mushers come into their homes to eat while they are there. Of course, some villages are larger than others, and so they have more people to help out. But it's an exciting time, and I think the children really, really like it, because I know they usually just miss school for the days that the mushers are coming through, so the children can come out and cheer the mushers on or help out.
There are several books out there there are several books out about the Iditarod. If you were to write a new one, what would you make sure was definitely included for readers to know?
Oh gosh, I don't. There's some good books out there. There is a really good book by Rod Perry about the beginnings of the race. There's a really good book by Dan Seavey out there. Um, both of those men are good friends of mine. In fact, Rod Perry quoted me several times and Tom in the book. And it's a good book to read to find out exactly how it started. Dan Seavey being a friend, I spent several hours with Dan going over what happened for the first Iditarod, and he included those conversations in his book. My daughters went with me, by the way, when I went up to talk to Dan about that, and they really enjoyed that. So I don't know if I would rewrite a book about it, because I would just actually point them to do two books, and those two in particular that are very accurate in their depiction about how the race started.
Tell us some things about those first races that people may not know these days.
I think there were more Alaskans in the first races than there are now. It is a worldwide, very famous race now, as you know, and mushers come from all over the world to participate. And so I would think that one of the main things that has happened is that we have fewer Alaskan mushers in the race than we had before, although several of those mushers have moved to Alaska and they train up here. I would like to say that probably the biggest thing that has changed the race has been the climate change. And I know in the beginning years when I was up here in 1970, in fact, I'll show you a picture of me mushing my team. Okay, there's a picture of me mushing my team back in the early 70s. It's a little blurry, but anyway, we would have snow for mushing in October. Now there might be 1 inch of snow out here. I'm looking outside. Usually we would have 3 or 4 feet of snow by this time in early years, in the early 70s and 80s. So climate change is, I think I'm still answering your question, I hope. Climate change is one of the biggest things that is affecting the race now, which is why it has been moved to a beginning in Fairbanks for 4 different races. There just is no snow over part of the race. And so consequently, the racers are not going over the Alaskan range. That is a tough part of the race. And so their race is more on level ground going from Fairbanks. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah.
okay.
You've been involved with the Iditarod for over 50 years, so you've seen tons of changes. What would you say are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, I would say the climate change is the biggest change. That and the gear that the mushers use has taken a change over the years. When we first started the race, they just used their race gear that they had at the time, because some of them traps for a living, so they use the sleds they use for trapping. Some mushers use race or sleds they use for short distance racing, which were not very suitable for the long distance race, such as the Iditarod. Now, most of the sleds have seats on them so that mushers can sit down for considerable lengths of time on the race. We never had seats on the race back in the beginning. They also have a lot bigger races or sleds, that have lots of more room for them to put equipment. They have to take so much equipment on them during the race. I'm trying to think if I'm covering enough here for this question. I would say the gear and the climate are the 2 biggest changes. And because of the challenge of the race, Now, when we first started the race, it took over 20 days to finish it. The fastest race time now, I believe, is a little over 8 days. And I believe Dallas Seavey set that time. Unless, I think that's the fastest time. Okay.
When you all started the race, did you ever imagine it would grow into the race it is today?
Good question. When we first started the race, first of all, we didn't know if anyone would even finish the race. It had never been done. It was a long time. It was a long ways. And so we were very, very anxious to see if it would get done and finished without somebody getting hurt. We were very considerate of their feelings and their ability to stay healthy during the race. And but we didn't have a lot of ways to help them if they did have trouble. So we were concerned about that. What was the other part of the question?
You answered it.
Oh, did I? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Do you have a specific message you would like to share with our listeners?
Oh my gosh. Well, as you can probably imagine, I do love the race. What is it? 53 years now it's been going. Oh, you asked too whether we thought it would always be a race that would go each year. We had no idea it would be continued after the first year. None at all. We had no expectations that it would. When they had the mushers banquet up in Nome after the first race, Joe asked the mushers if they wanted to do it again, and they said yes. And so that's when we started planning the second year. But the first year, we thought it would be a 1-year race only, and that's what we planned for. So that answers that part of the question. But I would say that if people really are interested in the race, they should read especially one of those 2 books that I mentioned, the one by Rod Perry or the one by Dan Seavey. They'll give them most information on the race. Rod Perry also wrote another book about the Iditarod Trail, which is a historical record of the trail, which is also very interesting reading. And so get interested, follow the trail like you guys are, get a map, follow the mushers. Do you have a map up in your room?
Not yet. It
Okay.
will be coming up this week.
Okay. All right.
I used to have one that we painted up on the wall, but I moved classrooms, so now I got to get a new one on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Our final segment is Gleo's Iditarod favorite. Are you ready?
Sure. I didn't. Part of the question was blanked out.
Liam's favorites, tell him.
Okay. It's about favorites.
Your favorite.
Yes. Your favorite.
Oh. All right.
Favorite.
Yeah, go ahead.
Favorite checkpoint.
There used to be Connect when we started the race actually in Anchorage, because you could see the mushers coming a long ways across the flats below the town of Connect. There's only a restaurant and bar there now, but there used to be a small town there. And probably there because we were able to watch the mushers as they came in and meet each one. So that was probably my favorite checkpoint, which is no longer a checkpoint.
Favorite route, northern or southern?
Oh gosh. They're both so different. And their teacher could tell you. I think one is more dangerous than the other one. I think the northern route is a little more dangerous than the southern route, but I really don't have a favorite as such.
Favorite piece of mushing gear?
Favorite mushing gear?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's a question, yeah, that I don't know if I have an answer to.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any favorite mushing gear. I don't mush in, like, it's been several years since I've mushed, and I always liked a good sled. And I used mostly a racing sled in my training, so that was probably my favorite part. That and the dog.
Your favorite change in the race?
Okay, that got blacked out. What was the?
Your favorite change in the race?
Oh, my favorite change. I think care of the dogs has increased tremendously since the first race. We're very, very concerned about the dogs, and we love the dogs, and the dogs love to run. People don't realize how these dogs really, really love to run. And I think that your teacher, having observed that many times, can acquiesce to that answer also. Boy, if you try, I had 45 dogs, and when I would hook up a team to train at night, and almost all of my training was at night because I taught school all day long, I would hook up 8 to 10 dogs at a time out of the 45. And then when I took off, the other dogs that got left behind would howl and howl and howl because they had wanted to go too. Sometimes I took 2 or 3 teams out a night so they'd all get a chance. And then we would take practice runs of anywhere from 7 to 10 miles a night. And okay.
Favorite Iditarod story to tell? Oh, favorite musher, sorry.
Oh, favorite mushers?
Yep.
Okay. Hmm.
That's
Well, some of them are friends of mine, and I'm not sure I should pick out a favorite. So that's a question that's a little hard to answer.
It's okay.
Yeah. But there are several that are friends, and yeah. So those are my favorites.
Your favorite Iditarod story to tell?
Well, we had one man come to the first race, and he was very drunk. And we had to tie him to the sled so that he wouldn't fall off of it.
okay.
And during the race, of course, he sobered up, and I won't say his name, but he sobered up during the race and finished the race, actually. But that was quite the story to have him come to the starting line and he could hardly stand on the sled. That's one of my favorite stories.
Gleo, thank you so much for sharing your incredible stories with us today. Your contributions to the Iditarod and the mushing world has left an amazing legacy. We appreciate you taking the time to be on the Husky Talk.
Well, I want to thank you for asking me, and it's always a pleasure to talk to students about the race. I do that in person here in Alaska, since I have a daughter who's a teacher and I have 4 grandchildren in school. And so it's quite common for me to go to their classrooms and talk about the Iditarod race every year. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy their questions. I enjoy your questions. And I hope I've answered most of them. And I want to thank you for having me and being able to share my stories of the Iditarod Trail Race.
Thanks again.
Goodbye.
Special thanks to our guest, Greer Huyck. for being on our show this week. If you have any questions, comments, or people you would like to hear on the show, email us at huskytalk1@gmail.com. We would like to also give credit to Hobo Jim for our intro song, the Iditarod Trail song, and our outro song.